be sure we have to keep winning. South Carolina has been winning. We need to keep winning with Pamela Evette as our next governor. Thank you.
Let the games begin in the race for governor as his final term gets closer to the end. Henry McMaster throwing his support behind one of the candidates who wants to take over his office, what it means for the campaign.
There was no way for us to know without us hearing from our federal partners. The Homeland Security didn't reach out, ICE didn't reach out, so we were trying to figure out first what was going on.
Blindsided by the feds, leaders in the capital city say a deal made in secret is landing an ICE office right in the middle of downtown Columbia. We separate fact from fiction in the controversy.
Everyone shouldn't be one bad month away from having something stamped on their permanent record forever.
South Carolina has a very real affordable housing crisis. Right now, a proposal that gives people a leg up, gaining some traction at the State House.
We've got to get a grip on this. The reason why I'm bringing this forward is because we need to do something about measles. We need to protect our children.
Removing the religious exemption, a Senate lawmaker says it's the best way to stop the spread of measles as an outbreak continues, but it's getting some pushback.
It is another Sunday here in South Carolina. I'm Brian McConkey. That's Trav Robertson.
And I'm Dave Wilson. Thanks so much for joining us. Connect to the Capitol starts right now.
All right, we have had quite a few days in the state of South Carolina. Henry McMaster throwing his support behind Lieutenant Governor, his number 2, Pam Evette, in the Republican race for governor. That's where we begin on this Sunday morning. Trav Robertson joining us here in studio, Dave Wilson, as well as we noted, Catherine Glenn Foster joining us later in the program. Let's start with this endorsement. I'm surprised a little bit. This changes things. What say you, gentlemen?
Poor Alan Wilson. I mean, Alan and Joe have been stalwarts of the Republican Party and probably been there. But I do think, and I said this off camera, if the Quinns were still involved in campaigns, this would not have happened.
It would not have happened because Henry McMaster has had a stronghold now in the governor's office for the last 9+ years. I think he's looking to continue his legacy that keeps being the word being used at the State House all the time. This is about the McMaster legacy, and I think he sees Pam Evette as the only person who's going to be able to help extend what I'm going to want to start calling McMaster 2.1 as we begin to look at what's going to be the next phase in the governor's race.
Yeah, with that concept of legacy in mind, within moments of the AP reporting this the day before the announcement, the statements already came in. Nancy Mace had one immediately. Marcus, if we could show that quickly, that statement from Nancy Mace that she put on social media about this. You can see giving praise to Governor McMaster for his service, calls Pam Evette a nice lady, but I think that's where her praise for her ends, and says it's her record that does the talking for her. A.G. Alan Wilson, who you said, Trav, poor Alan Wilson, he also put out a brief statement immediately after saying South Carolina conservatives want a new age of leadership, so that would dispute legacy, and he says he's excited about our ticket and our vision for the state moving forward. The Wilson camp also released a new ad a couple days before this. They likely knew it was coming.
He's got the money to do it. I mean, Alan has been leading in fundraising in this effort, and I'm not so sure that I would count the Wilsons out of this race.
I'm going to go back to the fact, and we've talked about this before, we are exactly at the same point where Nikki Haley was fifth person in a 5-person race. And these endorsements, these moves being done right now, to have already named a running mate this early on, to me shows the fact that the Wilson campaign was needing to find some other way to gain some level of traction. Evette feels like the only way that she's going to get some boost is from McMaster. She's hoping that Trump will follow in the coattails of that. Ironically, Trump and coattails don't normally go together. But I think that's what this is trying to do, to begin to move the needle forward, because we have nobody right now who is front running in this race.
Well, but you also have to remember, his filing opens March the 16th at noon, I believe, and you're still trying to see who's going to file and who's not going to file. I mean, this field is set as it appears now, but people still haven't written their checks and gone in and completed their paperwork. And there may be one or two of these folks that don't file to run for governor.
That is entirely possible because the polling still.
That's right.
It doesn't show much support for Senator Kimbrell, who we've had on the show a couple times.
And my question for you, Dave, is, right now, and you're going to talk about it later in the show, you've got ICE coming to downtown Columbia. You've got the Republican government overreach with masked gunmen shooting American citizens. You've got an affordability issue where people, it used to cost me $15.35 to go get a pack of chicken. Now it's $35. And you've got an opportunity here where you're going to see later in the show, people can no longer afford to live in housing in some of our most populated areas. People are going to be angry by the time we get to November, and are they going to be angry at a lame duck president going into this election cycle, or are they going to be angry at those leaders involved? So what does their endorsement really matter?
I think we're at a place where certain levels of endorsement in these state level races may or may not even matter.
Mm-hmm. Right.
The only one that everybody's trying to reach for is Trump. But to this point, it depends upon what's going to be going on and whether or not the Trump endorsement is going to carry any level of weight behind it. And we don't know that. Everybody's guesstimating that it will, but it depends upon what's going on in the rest of the federal level when we get to June.
Right, and I'm curious to see, and they know who they are, about the McMaster machine and his individuals moving over to the lieutenant governor's race. I'm not so sure that transition is going to be quite as easy as they want it to be.
So, Dave, do you want to trademark the McMaster 2.1? We'll put it on a paper, and we'll put it in your drawer.
Find my paper.
Put it in your drawer here on the desk where we have some other predictions you made over the last 6 to 8 months.
I think we're starting to get there really quick. There's been the rumors of his son Henry D. McMaster possibly running for some other statewide office. That rumor is kind of flailing back and forth. There was even a rumor today that Henry McMaster Jr. would end up being the running mate for Evette. And you want to sit here and go, to Wilson's point, I think that we are hitting a generational shift.
Yes, there's
We're seeing it at the federal level. We're seeing it at the state level. Will we see it at the statewide office level?
And that generational shift is going to be impacted by the anger and angst that the electorate is going to have. The economic pressure that people are feeling right now is not going to subside in the next 2 to 6 months.
Speaking of that anger, an issue that came up about midweek in Columbia, the presence of what's going to be a legal office for immigration and customs enforcement setting up in downtown Columbia. City leaders say they didn't see it coming, but we're going to talk about it when we come back. Catherine Glenn Foster now joining us. She's up in D.C. We know that we have tech issues from time to time. She's right over our shoulder.
There she is, right there on set.
She's right there, looking good as always. We want to get a few comments from you first about the endorsement that we talked about in segment 1 there, about Governor McMaster throwing his support behind Pam Evette.
Yeah, this really is about continuity and whether voters want it. McMaster is saying essentially, stay the course. And so the question for voters isn't the personality at this point with the lieutenant governor. It really is performance. And the question for South Carolinians is, are we satisfied with where we are on education, on economic growth, infrastructure, public safety? And through this all, we have to remember that endorsements matter, but they don't decide races. And so an endorsement from when you have a popular governor, it does give credibility, it gives donor access, it gives institutional support. But primaries really are about energy. They're about who's going to excite the voters, who's going to define a forward-looking vision. And so this race may in the end turn on whether voters want a steady hand or whether they want bold reform, whether they want more accountability, more access to social services, any number of different things that South Carolinians have repeatedly said that in fact they are interested in, that they don't necessarily want the same old, but it's time for a new chapter. And so the real impact of this truly is that it clears the lane and may discourage some more establishment points of view from challengers, but it can also embolden outsider or reform candidates, because when a governor steps in to signal their successor, it really does sharpen the field, and it forces contrast even in these still fairly early days.
I think that's an important point to bring up here.
Yeah.
And because if you look at this, the question that Catherine just brought up makes a whole lot of sense when you look at, does this embolden Mace? Does it embolden Kimbrell? Does it embolden, Ralph Norman's folks even more so? Maybe.
Well, and the only thing I would suggest is when Catherine used the word exciting and forward thinking, I've never heard anybody use the word exciting to define the lieutenant governor.
No.
And that's exactly it, Trav.
Right.
Because when you have a situation where it is an establishment candidate who's being endorsed by an establishment governor who has been in office for a decade now, what does that do? For some, it may turn them towards the left. It may turn them towards more of a Jermaine Johnson type of a candidate, someone who is still solidly at the core of South Carolina values, but on the other hand, brings enough newness, enough freshness, enough charisma, enough personal story, and enough of a change in policy to actually start to excite people without bringing in some of those concerns that another candidate may have.
Everyone mentioned in that first segment that there's so many issues in play here. We started with that soundbite from City Councilman Tyler Bailey about this ICE issue. How much of a federal issue does that become in the race for governor, where we're talking about this? Like, they're going to have to talk about this now because we've got the capital city dealing with this issue right now. So how do our candidates now face that?
Well, I think the councilman had it accurate. And what I really believe is while this is a national issue, the Republican government overreach is going to be on full display for Republicans, independents, and swing voters who don't like government overreach no matter who does it. And I think that they believe that some of the things ICE has been doing are clearly government overreach. But this is the big question. And Dave, when you have protesters on Main Street shutting down Soda City, shutting down businesses because the Republicans didn't tell anybody that they were coming to downtown Columbia, that makes it a local issue. And you start impacting local businesses and our community, and the Republican mayor and the Republicans who brought them down here are going to have to answer for that.
That's exactly right, Trav, because notice is important, but even more than notice, it's about proper spheres of authority. Federal authority here is clear. Immigration enforcement's a federal responsibility, and the federal government doesn't need local permission to lease office space. But legality and courtesy are different questions, and there's a real question. There's a deeper policy question here about should Congress reform immigration law, how it's actually being enforced in states across our great nation. That's where the real debate belongs. But the influx of ICE, it is having a tremendous effect across the board, and so we have these questions about transparency and about enforcement. Communication is key, and that's something that is lacking here. Federalism works best when communication and coordination happen instead of surprise announcements and then breaking out of that sphere of influence to step into really concerning areas.
Well, that's all the communication and cooperation. What's the third word that Henry McMaster always uses? There's another C word that goes along with that. It's that whole idea that there has to be a communication chain that exists from the federal level to the state level to the local level. You've got to have some people in the city of Columbia who are going to be living with fear and concern over the fact that there are ICE officers here. Whether you agree with the fact that immigration needs to take place, this type of immigration move needs to take place, or you don't, we have stepped back and looked at a situation where you have communities They tend to be more Democratic-leaning communities, especially as we've seen in Minneapolis, that have had some level of fear, pushback, and everything else that goes with that. This is a place of providing security and safety for Americans, and yet at the same time, you don't want to have to sit there and go, well, dadgum, I got to carry my passport with me everywhere I go in case I get pulled over.
And I want to add one more caveat to this.
Does not help. Even that does not solve the problem. And that's something that we're seeing over and over. And so we are, again, in a situation where we are losing trust in ICE. We can have a separate conversation about immigration and how our immigration system should be working. But when you have rogue agents who are not adequately trained, or if they have been trained, are the training needs massive reform, and they're out on the streets and picking up, in many cases, actual citizens, certainly people who have not committed violent crimes, and all too often children. This is a situation where we're losing trust, and the federal government has to step in, has to take another hard look at this and see, okay, how can we actually work and communicate and coordinate with local enforcement to ensure that we are in our proper lane?
And there was no coordination here, supposedly. But there's one caveat to this. When you talk about this Republican government overreach, and that is that when ICE brings people into our South Carolina state and puts them in local jails that they have agreements with, most people don't realize the government's not reimbursing that county and that state 100% of the cost to maintain those prisoners, but also, and this is the really important part, when those individuals are remanded or a judge says they are to be released, they release them into our communities. The very communities that might not necessarily have wanted those individuals there to begin with, and that's something that people don't talk about.
Yeah. And this is the issue where there was. Are you going to do an alligator alley like they did in Florida? Are we going to do the Palmetto
Slammer was another one?
Palmetto Pen.
Yeah, and you'd go, guys, come on. I mean, this is an attempt to kowtow to a Washington directive, and I'll be honest with you, I look at this from the standpoint of trying to name the Palmetto Pen, and I'm going, stop trying to figure out how you're going to get the Trump endorsement and figure out how you're going to start leading in South Carolina.
That's right.
That's right. We come back, another issue that was brought up in the open, the cost of living and the cost of housing, and if you can even get it.
Right.
That's when we come back.
Everyone shouldn't be one bad month away from having something stamped on their permanent record forever.
South Carolina has a real affordable housing crisis right now. There's a proposal in the South Carolina legislature that gives people a leg up, and it's gaining some traction right now in the South Carolina House. This is a big move that is being made right now to address the issue of affordability, because we have a huge issue with that. It used to be you could afford a house. It was relatively easy to do, but right now the cost of housing is so much higher than it used to be.
It is. And what this bill would do is if you have an eviction on your record, it's not there forever.
Right.
After 5 years, it would strike it. And so many people testified and gave personal experiences of that the other day, saying, we had a couple bad months and it's following me everywhere.
I think you mentioned it was one of the most crowded hearings you've been to earlier.
Crowded.
And I do think, I was talking to a young lady the other day, and she simply looked at me and she said, I think the ability of me to afford a house in downtown Columbia is not attainable to me. Mm-hmm. And that's not what the American dream was supposed to be about. And I think it goes to the heart of some of these other issues we've spoken of, and that is, affordability is not a liberal democratic word. It's a serious problem, whether you're talking about gas, chicken, milk, or a home. And when you have the number of colleges that we have and the number of young people who are starting out and they no longer can live on campus, so they have to live off campus, this is going to be a life raft to some of those young people too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Affordability really is critical to the American dream. If we don't have affordability, if we don't have the ability to access what America promises to one and all who come here and work hard because of rising housing costs, because of limited affordable inventory and increasing rent burdens, it is a huge problem. And so we're increasingly seeing, we see all the time as we talk with folks on the street in hearings, we hear about the difficult times people are going through. All too often people are, a couple of paychecks, one layoff away from being in a housing crisis themselves. And so when we do have perhaps an eviction record, when we're going through that tough time, that shouldn't be a life sentence. Maybe a single eviction during COVID or a temporary hardship, it could permanently block, not temporarily block, someone's housing access for good. And so if that debt is paid or the case is dismissed, it shouldn't be following someone forever. That is the entire point of restoration, of restorative justice, so that we're not permanently excluding people. And of course, our landlords, they have bills to pay too, but we have to balance that with tenant dignity and property rights. And so we should be able to distinguish between habitual, constantly at the edge, maybe needs to rethink their housing situation, and a one-time hardship.
This is the most important thing to keep in mind. When you take a look at the cost of living, move into any area of this city. You can't do it alone on a single paycheck. It used to be you would take a look at somebody's income. Okay, 30% of your income needs to go towards housing.
That's right.
When you start thinking about a standard budget number to start working from, for a lot of people right now, that number is upwards of 50, 55, 60%. Well, guess what you can't do then? It makes it harder to buy groceries, makes it harder to buy other things, pay electricity bills. Those are the sorts of things we've got to begin to start addressing because it's expensive to live now.
House rich, cash poor.
And important news for home builders. My own grandfather built homes up in Georgia, up in the Atlanta area. Housing is the supply problem first, because South Carolina, we talk all the time about our growth in this state, and our growth is outpacing our housing development. And we have these regulatory barriers, these zoning restrictions, infrastructure limits, and that all drives cost as well. And so part of the affordability crisis is that availability, is the supply, and we can't solve it without increasing the supply.
Something else leaders are trying to solve in this state is the public health issue, the measles. We talked about it last week and the week before. We're going to finish up quickly with that when we come back on Connect to the Capitol. All right, stopping the spread of measles, a topic of debate at the State House, has been for a couple of weeks now. Senator Margie Bright Matthews wants to remove the religious exemption when it comes to the measles vaccine in this state, as South Carolina really is on the brink of experiencing the biggest outbreak in nearly 40 years, as we went over last week. This is a proposal that the AG has already, Alan Wilson has already taken a stand against, saying, hey, that's not going to meet constitutional muster. But this is more about messaging here, I think, about public health, is it not?
I mean, the fact is that we've got a crisis and we are leading the country in measles outbreaks. This is not a good sign for South Carolina.
No, not at all.
It really is a national story. Religious liberty is a constitutional right. It's something that every American has as part of their First Amendment rights. Any of your sincerely held religious beliefs, the state has to meet a very high burden before infringing on those beliefs. And even a public health concern, it doesn't erase constitutional scrutiny. But with that said, when you don't have 4 out of every 5 people in a state or in a country who are vaccinated, then you risk a gigantic outbreak. And that's exactly what we're seeing the start of here in South Carolina. And if you start eliminating religious exemptions for one vaccine, the precedent is set. So for me, this is a situation where we're taking a sledgehammer to a problem that really requires a chisel. What we need to be doing is discussing in more precise ways how we need to be applying the First Amendment religious liberty protections and what may need to be discussed, what may need to be submitted in order to achieve that. Because some people may not be able to to adhere to their religion and receive this vaccine. But if we don't have the vast majority of people receiving the vaccine, then every single one of us, even the ones, the majority of us who do have the vaccine, who were vaccinated back as kids, we are still at risk for getting measles. And this is, again, a serious, often fatal illness.
All right.
I don't want it.
No, and the cases continue to go up. That's going to have to be the final word on the for this week on Connect to the Capitol. Catherine Glenn Foster up in the nation's capital. All of us here in the capital of South Carolina. We'll see you again in a week.
Thank you for having us.